Gentlemen, a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another,
we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights,
that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men.
And that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. And for the support of this declaration,
It's one of the great ironies of American history.
on the protection
The man who led the revolution nearly lost his life fighting for that same British Empire 20 years before.
fortunes and our sacred honor.
On the eve of battle, George Washington couldn't help but recollect that earlier war.
Protection of divine providence.
I did not let the anniversary of this month pass without a grateful remembrance of the escape we had at the meadows. And on the banks of the Monongahela.
That was the war that made him the leader he was. The French and Indian War. But the day it all began, there was nothing heroic about the father of his country. To be fair, Washington is only 22. Ambitious and a little naive, he doesn't realize he's about to become a pawn in a chess game he doesn't understand.
They are here.
Washington's orders are to drive the French from this contested part of the frontier, with force if necessary. He doesn't know these French soldiers are on a diplomatic mission. The eager young major doesn't take the time to find out what the French are after.
fire!
It's George Washington's first taste of battle, and he likes it.
I can, with truth, assure you that I heard the bullets whistle. Believe me, there was something charming in the sound.
Ne tirez pas! Ne tirez pas! Arrêtez!
Their retreat cut off by Washington's Indian allies, the French surrender within minutes. Their officer sits wounded.
This is Ensign Joseph Coulon de Villiers de Jumonville. He's an envoy. Here's a letter from his commander.
I do not speak French, do you?
Under the protocol of the day, Washington is responsible for the well-being of the wounded Frenchmen. But he soon realizes that this deep in the woods, different rules apply.
Tu n'es pas encore mort, mon père.
It turns out this Indian leader, known as the Half-King, has his own agenda. Within minutes, the Half-King's warriors plunder the French camp, scalping the dead and wounded before they leave. The massacre is not an outcome Washington expected, nor could he have foreseen the consequences. This incident will trigger an all-out war for North America that soon spreads around the world. We call it the French and Indian War. This is the story of a war that helped create a new nation no one could ever have predicted. This is the story of the war that made America. To understand how young George Washington could set such momentous events into motion, we have to go back in time, before he blundered into battle, and see how the stage had already been set for war. Spring 1752, 2 years before George Washington's battle in the woods. Speculators from Washington's native Virginia are coming to Pennsylvania to negotiate with the region's Indians for land. They're after a foothold in one of the most contested regions of North America. In the 1750s, Britain holds the East Coast, while Canada and the Mississippi Valley are dominated by the French. Between those two empires lies a giant prize called the Ohio Country, a region the size of France that is largely empty and up for grabs. Both France and Britain set their sights on one spot in particular: a strategic river junction called the Forks of the Ohio, where Pittsburgh stands today. But the Forks of the Ohio isn't theirs for the taking. The native people consider this their land and not something that can be traded or sold. But there is one Indian leader in the region who is willing to talk. The Half-King. The same man who will play such an important role in George Washington's life 2 years later.
Eswahe. Don't ever forget that any sign of friendship that we make to the English will not escape the French.
But the French seem weak, while the English traders give us goods when our hunters bring the skins.
In native tradition, women elders provide counsel for important decisions. For the Half-King, the stakes in this upcoming negotiation couldn't be higher. Most of the region's Indians prefer the French, but if the British offer him generous trade goods to distribute among his people, an alliance with Britain could put him in a position of power. It's a dangerous gamble, but the Half-King has few options. His people are refugees who have been driven out of their homelands in the East by tribal wars and European settlers. Diseases have devastated their numbers. Now 3,000 of them have made the Ohio Country their new homeland. They guard it jealously. But with the French encroaching from the north, and the English from the east. The half-king knows he must make some kind of accommodation.
Why are they firing?
Nothing to fear. It's their way of welcome. It's when they fire their guns at the end of the parley that you need to worry.
Parleys between Indians and whites are a fact of frontier life. And the rules are well established. Trade goods grease the wheels. The Virginians have brought a small fortune. The items are more than just gifts. Native people rely on European goods for their survival. Providing a steady supply of these necessities will go far toward securing Indian allies. And then there is wampum, crucial to any parley. Intricately woven belts and strings, encoded with messages of war, peace, and friendship. Until there is a ceremonial passing of the wampum, no negotiation would be complete.
When it came to winning favor with the Ohio Valley Indians, the British had some catching up to do. Years of land swindles had left native peoples suspicious of British motives. The French, on the other hand, had traded with the Indian nations and fought beside Indian warriors for more than a century. So for the visiting Virginians, this parley was more than just closing a land deal. It was about winning these people over.
The half-king is playing a delicate diplomatic game between the British and the French. And to make it more complicated, he's not altogether his own master in this negotiation. The half-king and his people are one of many Indian groups, and they are far from the most powerful. The dominant force in the Northeast is the Iroquois League, a coalition of 6 nations spread across northern New York. The Iroquois claim sovereignty over the Ohio country and all the Indians who live there. Technically, they haven't authorized the half-king to make an agreement with the British. So if he goes ahead and does it anyway, he'll be asserting his independence from the Iroquois League. In fact, he's called the half-king because of his limited authority. But if he can strike a good deal with the British at this parley, it could make him a leader to be reckoned with.
Brethren, be assured that the king, our father, in purchasing your lands, had never any...
Why is it taking so long?
The way it is with the Indians, there will be much talk and even more giving of gifts before the meat of the matter is addressed.
Kindly accept this belt as a symbol of our two peoples living together as one.
The talking goes on for more than a week. Finally, the half-king agrees to let the Virginians build a small trading post at the Forks. With the 2 European empires encroaching on the Ohio country, the half-king has chosen what seems the best of 2 bad options.
The French claim all the land on one side of the river, and the English claim everything on the other. If that be the case, I ask, where does the Indian land lie? We live in a country between, and therefore the land belongs to neither one nor to the other. But the great being above allowed it to be a place of residence for us.
Philip, how do we say farewell?
Ni wapete haleshelapwa.
Ni hapete halepshilepwa.
So the Virginians leave the parley, having secured the half-king's support. He will back the English over the French, and he will allow the Virginians to return the following year to build their post at the forks of the Ohio River. The full effects of the half-king's decision won't be felt for years to come. And one thing is certain: the French are not about to give up the forks without a fight. One look at the map shows why. The French already control Canada and the Great Lakes region. By building a string of outposts through the Ohio country, they could link their French forts in Canada with their Louisiana colony and keep the British bottled up on the East Coast. A memorandum by the Marquis de la Galissonière, governor of New France, urges action. If the rapid progress of the English colonies be not arrested, they will possess in a short time formidable armaments on the continent of America. And if that happens, warns the Marquis, then all the other French colonies will fall to the British as well.
La Galissonière was a visionary. He saw that the struggle for North America had global implications. If the French lost, France would be weakened in Europe as well. For Britain, the stakes were just as high. If it allowed France to dominate the Ohio country, the British colonies could never expand westward.
So British authorities send an expedition to order the French to withdraw from the Ohio country. The man they picked to lead it? None other than the 21-year-old Virginian, George Washington. Washington is a natural choice. Brimming with ambition, imposingly tall, he is well connected and eager to make a name for himself. Washington draws his own map of the journey that will take him past the forks of the Ohio to Fort Le Boeuf near Lake Erie, a 500-mile journey that gets underway just as winter sets in. Along the route, Washington comes to a French base. The officer in charge gives a warm welcome to the young Virginian. But the French make it very clear they won't give in to his ultimatum.
That night, he invited us to sup with them. Soon, the wine, which they dosed themselves with freely, loosened their tongues.
With utmost charm, the officer lets you know the sentiment among the French in the region.
They told us that it was their absolute design to take possession of the Ohio, and by God, they would do it. For, though the English could raise 2 men to their 1, they knew our actions were too slow to prevent any undertaking of theirs.
Brushed off by the French, Washington starts back to Virginia in December 1753. His report on the mission goes all the way to London, where King George II hears of the young Virginian who had done his best, but failed to persuade the French to leave the Ohio Valley. The following spring, the Virginians take up the half-king's offer to build a trading post at the forks of the Ohio. But it's not to be. Almost immediately, French troops forced the Virginians to surrender the forks and abandon their unfinished building. The Half-King is furious. By taking the forks, the French have humiliated him, and the inability of the English to fight back makes him look like he's backed the losing side. He calculates how to get even. It's the young George Washington who unwittingly offers him that chance. That's how Washington came to ambush the French, his first taste of battle. That same spring of 1754, Washington is on his way back to the Forks with orders to help the Virginians finish their trading post. When he learns he is too late, he makes plans to confront the French and take the Forks back. The Half-King agrees to be his ally. But Washington doesn't realize that the Indian leader has a complicated agenda of his own. If the Half-King orchestrates a confrontation between the British and the French, it will strengthen his own hand in the region. But why does the Half-King go further and kill the wounded Frenchman? It's an act of revenge for his humiliation at the Forks, and a message to the French to back off. And he knows the blame will fall on George Washington, not himself.
Tu n'es pas encore mort, mon père.
You are not dead yet, my father, says the Half-King. An ironic twist to the respectful term the Indians usually use for their French allies. Washington's skirmish alone probably would not have triggered a larger war. But the cold-blooded murder of their wounded officer, the French couldn't possibly let that go without a response. Within weeks, the brother of the slain Ensign Jumonville sets off in pursuit. Meanwhile, Washington has withdrawn his men to a large meadow. They build a crude stockade that the Virginians wryly name Fort Necessity. Washington expects the Half-King to help defend the fort. But the Indian leader has lost confidence in the young major.
This Washington, he is a good-natured man, but he has no experience. Always driving us to fight by his direction. And now he wants us to make a stand with him against the French. And that little thing upon the meadow.
Washington's only Indian ally leaves.
We have no choice. We will make our stand here.
The French have no such problems with their native allies. They arrive accompanied by 100 Shawnee, Mingo, and Delaware warriors.
About 9 o'clock on the 3rd of July, the enemy advanced with shouts and dismal Indian yells.
Washington intends to fight face-to-face in the field, European style. But the French and their Indian allies don't cooperate.
They then, from every little rising tree, bush, stump, and stone, kept up a golden, constant fire, which we returned as best we could. Till late in the afternoon, when there fell the most tremendous rain that can be conceived. filled our trenches with water and wet not only the ammunition and the firelocks, but also the few stores that we had, leaving us only a few bayonets for defense.
By nightfall, the situation is hopeless. When the French commander offers terms for surrender, Washington signs the soggy document. Unable to read French, he relies on a Dutch officer to translate. It turns out that Jumonville's brother is taking a sweet revenge. Washington doesn't learn until later that the document includes a confession to the assassination of Ensign Jumonville.
The morning after the battle, the victorious French allowed Washington to retreat towards Virginia with his wounded and tattered troops. Word of his defeat spread quickly. This was not the kind of fame the young Washington had been seeking. The date, oddly enough, was the 4th of July, 1754.
The defeat at Fort Necessity proves disastrous for the half-king as well. Any clout he has among the region's Indians has now evaporated. Within months, the half-king is dead. A Delaware chief described the uncertain situation in the Ohio country that fall of 1754. Things seem to take another turn, he said, and a high wind is rising. As war clouds gather, the powerful Iroquois League ponders its strategy. If they take sides in this white man's war, there's a good chance they will find themselves fighting against other Indians. But if they remain neutral, there's also the chance either France or Britain will take possession of the Ohio country. And if that happens, the Iroquois could end up with nothing at all. For more than 100 years, the native people of the Northeast have deftly played Britain and France against each other. But now the swelling imperial ambitions of the Europeans threaten to overwhelm them. Across the Atlantic, in the Palace of Versailles, Louis XV and his ministers spend the winter of 1755 preparing to defend their North American interests. By the time the ice has melted on the St. Lawrence River, 1,800 French troops have been deployed to Canada. King George II and his ministers in Whitehall move even faster. 1,000 redcoats sail to Virginia in early spring of 1755. The British plan is to strike the French in the Ohio country and simultaneously in northern New York and Nova Scotia. A three-pronged attack that will drive the French back into Canada. War is now inevitable.
First, the troops I have the honor to command will take Fort Duquesne and thereby remove the French from the forks of the Ohio. Second,
it's an audacious strategy, in keeping with the commander-in-chief sent by London to carry it out. General Edward Braddock, a politically connected career officer with little battlefield experience.
Once we have secured this important post, we shall proceed to Niagara, if the season will permit. And I suppose it will, for this Duquesne can hardly detain me above 3 or 4 days.
Fort Duquesne, Braddock's first objective, is held by the French and their Indian allies. It stands guard at the crucial forks, controlling all traffic through the Ohio country. To assault it is an ambitious plan.
As I was saying, gentlemen.
But before he even begins, the general runs into political problems.
In North America. And he has given me
Braddock expects the colonies to help pay for this military campaign.
Let me acquaint you with the...
But the governors of the colonies reply that their assemblies would prefer to be asked, not ordered.
Pish, gentlemen! You cannot tell me you have not the power to make these little assemblies do the king's will. The matter is urgent. There is no time to be lost. I need not remind each of you that this expedition is an expensive enterprise. I cannot sufficiently express my indignation against the provinces of Pennsylvania and Maryland who refuse to contribute anything. As for the Indians, these savages may indeed be a formidable enemy to raw American militia, but it is impossible they should make any impression against disciplined troops.
Braddock's march against Fort Duquesne gets off to a slow start that spring of 1755. The army waits at Fort Cumberland, Maryland. As in every army of the time, female camp followers are a semi-official part of the force. Close to 200 women serve as laundresses, cooks, and nurses.
This washing is endless. Betsy, when your husband's regiment went into battle, was you ever frightened? For yourself, I mean. What if the enemy was to come up from the rear?
The truth say I never was with the troops in an actual battle. But I shouldn't worry about anything like that here. The sergeant says that we outnumber the Froggies. And as for them Indians, well, everyone knows they can't fight in any manner that will prevail over our trained soldiers. The sergeant says General Braddock don't even want them savages fighting on our side. That's how little he thinks of them.
Don't talk to me about General Braddock. You did hear, didn't you, Betsy? He's ordered all us women going up country with the army to be examined for disease by the surgeons. To see if we're clean enough to march? Well, it's an insult for certain. I'm a married woman, not a whore.
The men they should be looking at.
I have to say, this time I hope you'll be suitably impressed.
General Braddock names George Washington one of his chief aides. Though it's not an official British commission, Washington jumps at the opportunity to serve alongside the highest-ranking British officer on the continent.
The men are looking very good indeed. Yes, sir.
The general orders daily parade ground exercises to keep discipline sharp.
Charge your bayonets! Rest your bayonets!
But about 1/3 of Braddock's army are American provincials, untrained enlistees from Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. Braddock pronounces them very indifferent men. It isn't only the drilling that's unfamiliar to the Americans. Severe punishments for even small infractions provide a closer look into the army under King George than many Americans have seen before. At night, the Indians living near the fort put on demonstrations for the British and Americans. Dances that suggest the fighting style of the warriors. The soldiers now know what the famous Indian war whoop actually sounds like. The Americans encourage Braddock to court Indian allies, but the general's scorn shows. All but 7 warriors go home. In June of 1755, Braddock's march to the Ohio country finally gets underway. A long, thin column of wagons, artillery, horses, and camp followers, 4 miles long. "300 axemen clear the way. It's a logistical feat that only the British would attempt. Marching an army through 100 miles of dense forest, steep mountains, and muddy river crossings. After a week, they have gone only 22 miles. Frustrated by the slow progress, Braddock splits his force and takes an advance column of 1,400 men ahead. It is Washington's 3rd adventure into the Ohio Valley. This time, he hopes to finally drive the French out. The main body of the army escapes any direct attacks. Others aren't always so lucky. English messenger James Smith is captured far from the column and taken to the French fort Duquesne.
Move as fast as you can.
Running the gauntlet is customary for all Indian captives. Smith is turned over to the French. He'll wait to see whether the English will ever arrive at the fort. After 3 grueling weeks, the British Army finally approaches the Monongahela River, just a few miles south of Fort Duquesne. Morale is high. General Braddock has led his army nearly 100 miles. His engineers built log roads to cross the swamps. A company of sailors rigged block and tackle to hoist the heavy cannon over the hills. The worst is behind them. Once they reach the fort, nothing can stand in their way.
It is my hope that this evening we will be drinking a toast at Fort Duquesne.
Braddock has succeeded in transporting a modern army and its artillery deep into the wilderness. Washington is impressed. This is the kind of British officer the young Virginian aspires to be. Indian scouts working with the French keep a close watch on the approaching army. When word reaches Fort Duquesne of the advancing British column, the French realize their only hope is to ambush the British as they cross the Monongahela River. But their Indian allies balk, unwilling to take on the large enemy force. The French captain Léonard de Beaujeu dons Indian war dress and paints his face, a gesture of solidarity the British would never consider. The Indians agree to join the fight. At the front of the British column, George Croyan, a Pennsylvania trader, leads the 7 remaining Indian scouts, moving quickly the last few miles toward Fort Duquesne. Captain Beaujeu's force of nearly 900 Indians, Canadians, and French regulars moves just as fast toward Braddock's column, still hoping to catch them at the river crossing. It's impossible to say who is more surprised when they encounter each other deep in the woods. The elite British Grenadiers move forward. Beaujeu leads the warriors and Canadians into the woods. He'll fight the battle the Indian way. In the beginning, it looks as if the highly disciplined British will prevail. Their volleys prove deadly immediately. Beaujeu is one of the first to fall. But once the Indians and Canadians slip into the hills on either side of the British, everything changes. Washington and the other officers struggle to keep their men in formation. The French regulars are deployed in front of the British column, blocking any forward movement. While the Indians and Canadians snipe at them from both sides. The British start to fall back, but on the narrow forest road, they collide with the troops behind them. Chaos ensues. Deadly tangles of redcoats mass together, making pathetically easy targets. The artillery proves useless in the dense woods.
We know the Indian mode.
Certainly not, sir. Mind your place.
The general's been hit!
It doesn't take long for the attackers to reach the rear of the British column. It is said that of the 54 women who marched with Braddock's army that day, only 4 returned.
No! No!
Some of the missing would turn up in Canada, ransomed from the Indians by the French. After 3 harrowing hours, it's over. The French and Indians have lost only 21 dead, while nearly 1,000 British and provincial soldiers are killed or wounded. Washington has had several horses shot out from under him, but is unhurt. What's left of Braddock's army makes a desperate retreat.
The shocking scenes which presented themselves in this night's march are not to be described. The dead, the dying, the wounded, the groans, the lamentation, the cries of the wounded for help along the road were enough to pierce a heart of adamant. The folly and consequence of opposing compact bodies against the manner of the Indians fighting in the woods, which had in a manner been predicted, were now so clearly verified.
Word of the great Indian and French victory reaches Fort Duquesne by the end of the day. British prisoner James Smith reported the moment of the warriors' return.
At sundown, I beheld a small party coming in with about a dozen prisoners. I stood on the fort wall until I beheld them begin to burn one of these men. They had him tied to a stake and kept touching him with firebrands.
Smith is sure he'll meet the same fate. Instead, he will be adopted by an Indian family to replace kin who have died in battle. He will spend the next 6 years living among the Indians. The French know they owe this victory to their native allies. The Indians gather the honors of battle to bring home evidence of their great feat. In European warfare, the victors might have pursued the fleeing British to crush them altogether. But here in North America, the native peoples have different aims. They're not fighting to secure an empire, just trying to drive the invaders from their land. For now, anyway, the battle is over. Five days into the retreat, General Braddock dies of his wounds.
At an encampment near the Great Meadows, the brave but unfortunate General Braddock breathed his last. He was interred with the honor of war, and it was left to me to see that performed. He was deposited in the road over which the army, wagons and all, passed to hide every trace, lest the entombment be discovered.
George Washington would admire Braddock's battlefield bravery for the rest of his life. The general's brass-barreled pistol and bloodied sash would hold a place of honor at Mount Vernon.
For years after the Battle of the Monongahela, visitors here would come across the unburied bones of British and American soldiers. But empires don't come cheap. Both Britain and France would pay dearly in blood to win a prize as huge as North America. This was just the beginning. Neither side had any idea how costly this war would be, or how many battles there were still to lose.
Britain has a new general. He's an influential Irish merchant with no military experience. But William Johnson has other qualifications: a strong grasp of native culture and politics, and a close friendship with the Mohawk chief, Teanagouin. At first, the two seem unlikely allies, but both are mavericks, unafraid to venture into the other's culture. Teanagouin has visited New York, Boston, and even London, and has acquired the Christian name Chief Hendrick. Johnson hopes Hendrick will help with an ambitious expedition he is planning. In recent years, the French have moved from Canada into territory the British consider their own. In the summer of 1755, Britain has a three-pronged strategy to move them back. While General Braddock marches on the Ohio country, other forces advance on Nova Scotia. Johnson's job is to take control of Lake Champlain. It's a bold strategy requiring considerable manpower. Before he met with disaster, Braddock had 2,200 British troops under his command. Johnson's army has none. Instead, he'll need Indians. So Johnson invites representatives of the Iroquois Six Nations to a council fire at his home. As a trader, Johnson has acquired a deep appreciation for the Indian custom of gift-giving. Now he spends a small fortune on trade goods. And he is not disappointed. 1,100 Indians show up to hear what the British have to offer. Through interpreters, Johnson tries to convince the delegates that the British are there for the Indians' own good.
Brethren, the King of England has sent to this continent with a large number of armed men, great guns, and implements of war, to protect you and all his other subjects within these dominions from the insults and encroachments of the French.
Johnson reminds them of long ties between the Six Nations and the Crown.
These books testify that it is now 100 years since your forefathers and ours became known to each other. This covenant chain of love and friendship is the dread and envy of all your enemies and ours.
The Iroquois have long made it their policy to remain neutral. Johnson must persuade them to join his side.
By keeping it bright and unbroken, we have never spilt in anger one drop of each other's blood.
Johnson has prepared wampum, woven belts and strings that convey messages of war and friendship.
I give you this belt of wampum as a testament.
The speeches last for days, according to carefully prescribed protocol.
By this belt, we acknowledge the great King of England, our father, is the master, and we put our trust in him. We acknowledge our attachment to the English, and we hope you will keep it on your side and trust, as we will do on ours.
Go with me. My war kettle is on the fire. My canoe is ready to put in the water. My gun is loaded, my sword by my side. I desire and expect you will now take up the hatchet.
Johnson's more than just a diplomat. He has chosen to make his home among the Indians. Chief Big Business, as the Indians call him, would later marry an Indian woman and have several children of mixed race. Now he tries to capitalize on his long-standing friendship with Hendrik. For days, he entertains the Six Nation delegates: Mohawk, Onondaga, Oneida, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora. But what weighs on the minds of the delegates is the prospect of shedding Indian blood to fight for a white man's war. In the end, most refuse to break their neutrality.
I found all the nations, except the Mohawks, extremely averse to taking any part with us in the present active measures against the French.
His council fire ends in disappointment. Only Hendrik and 200 of his Mohawk warriors agree to fight with Johnson. Undermanned and behind schedule, Johnson leads his force to an encampment near the base of the lake the French call Saint-Sacrement, which Johnson renames Lake George in honor of the English king. From here, Johnson will cross over into Lake Champlain, where he plans to attack a strategic fort on the watery highway between New York and Canada. Johnson's force is made up of Hendrik's 200 Mohawk warriors and 3,000 men recruited from the colonies. A few days after arriving, Johnson orders Hendrik to lead a detachment of warriors and colonials to reinforce his position against the French. They're unaware they're walking into a trap. Canadian Mohawk, allied with the French, don't want to shed the blood of their fellow Mohawk from New York. One calls out to warn Hendrik of the impending peril.
Hey!
For a moment, they appeal to each other as Mohawk, not to fight a white man's war. But the warning comes too late. Within minutes, Hendrik, 30 of his warriors and 150 colonials are dead. The battle becomes known as the Bloody Morning Scout. Those who survive run 4 miles back to the encampment, where Johnson, never tested in battle, is directing the building of a hasty defense.
Come on, lads! Roll it in! Now! Now! Come on! Move! Come on now! Come on!
2 companies of French grenadiers form a column and charge the entrance to Johnson's camp.
Come on then! Atta lads! That's me. Come on! Come on then!
By the time the French get within 75 yards, Johnson's men are ready.
Stand! Now! Fire!
The fighting continues throughout the day. The Battle of Lake George proves costly to both sides. Johnson's men succeed in forcing the French to retreat, but their mood is hardly victorious. Johnson has taken a musket ball in the backside. The Mohawk return home to mourn their dead. Johnson's men are too exhausted to go on. Unable to reach Lake Champlain, the best Johnson can do is build a fort securing his position at the base of Lake George. For the next 4 years, Lake George remains the front line between 2 empires. The 1750s are a dangerous time to be in the Pennsylvania backcountry for settlers and Indians. Mary Jemison's narrative survives as a vivid account of life on the frontier in those days.
Our family, as usual, was busily employed about their common business. Father was shaving an axe helve at the side of the house. My 2 oldest brothers were at work near the barn. A man that lived in our neighborhood took our horse to go to his house after a bag of grain. Mother was making preparations for breakfast with the little ones and myself.
Until a few years before, Indians and white settlers in the backcountry lived as neighbors, sometimes as friends, sometimes not. Now they were enemies. The war between the British and the French presented an opportunity for Indians to pursue their own agenda, to drive white settlers from lands they considered their own. So they attacked homesteads and took captives to frighten settlers into leaving. And there's another reason. Indians have long taken captives, both male and female, as a way to replace warriors killed in battle. And with the French and Indian War taking many more Indian lives, the need for captives is growing.
The party that took us consisted of 6 Indians and 4 Frenchmen. We traveled till dark without a mouthful of food or a drop of water. Towards evening, we stopped to encamp for the night. As soon as I had finished my supper, an Indian took off my shoes and stockings and put a pair of moccasins on my feet, which my mother observed. I can remember her words. My dear little Mary, I fear that the time has arrived when we must be parted forever. Your life, my child, I think will be spared, but we shall be tomahawked in this lonesome place. Be careful, and do not forget your English tongue.
For Indians, scalps carry great significance. In taking scalps, warriors appropriate the spiritual power of their victims. Victims like Mary Jemison's family.
The Indians took from their baggage a number of scalps and went about preparing them by the fire. Those scalps I knew. My mother's hair was red, and I could easily see the children's from each other. That sight was most appalling, yet I was obliged to endure it without complaining. In the course of the night, they made me to understand that they should not have killed the family if the whites had not pursued them.
While the advance on Lake George ended in stalemate, Braddock's forces had met with disaster. When they retreated, the British frontier was left undefended from North Carolina to New York. Left in charge of this dangerous territory is a new Virginia regiment, made up exclusively of colonials. In command is George Washington. He's only 23, but he's learning to be a leader of men. His regiment has an impossible task. There are too few men to secure such a long frontier. Washington complains to Virginia's governor that his men are not getting the support they deserve.
Your Honor may see to what unhappy straits the distressed inhabitants and myself are reduced. The melancholy situation of the people, the little prospect of assistance, the gross and scandalous abuse cast upon the officers in general, which is reflecting upon me in particular.
Washington intends to train his men until they perform as well as British regulars, and he hopes one day to be rewarded with a royal commission. Yet he worries that this may never happen.
The distant prospect, if any, of gaining honor and reputation in the service causes me to lament the hour that gave me a commission, and would induce me, at any other time than this of imminent danger, to resign, without one hesitating moment. From this command, I can never expect to reap either honor or benefit.
At the start of Braddock's campaign, Washington had volunteered as the general's aide. At the side of a master, he had glimpsed the art of strict military discipline.
Discipline is the soul of an army. It makes small numbers formidable, procures success to the weak and esteem to all.
It's discipline, Washington believes, that will turn his Virginia regiment into an elite fighting force. His men are a mix of immigrants and vagrants. Insubordination and desertion are rampant.
Poison! Huh! First fire! Huh! Fire! Hands! Pixel! Hands!
Washington takes two deserters and decides to send a message to his troops by making their punishment a public spectacle. Your Honor will, I hope, excuse my hanging instead of shooting them, Washington later tells Virginia's governor. It conveys much more terror to the others. It was for example's sake that we did it. Washington was taking the discipline of the British Army as his model. He wanted to make his colonial soldiers as professional as redcoats, the best soldiers of his day. Not all colonials had the same ambition. Unlike Washington, New England officers did not admire the British Army's practice of discipline. They worried that if they were placed under direct British command, they could be flogged or hanged just like the redcoats were. For this reason, they took their enlistment contracts very seriously, as a guarantee that they would not be required to serve under any officers but their own. New Englanders argued that if the terms of their enlistments were violated, it would be grounds for them to dissolve the colonial army altogether. In July 1756, Lieutenant General John Campbell, the Earl of Loudoun, arrives to take Braddock's place as Commander-in-Chief of His Majesty's forces. Like Braddock, he expects colonial soldiers to serve under his command. He's in for a rude awakening. At his headquarters in Albany, Loudoun is kept waiting, a new experience for his lordship.
Where is he?
Loudoun has summoned the head of colonial forces, Major General John Winslow, to explain the New Englanders' stubbornness.
I desire to be informed by you whether the troops now raised by the several provinces and colonies of New England, and armed with His Majesty's arms, will, in obedience with His Majesty's commands, act in conjunction with His Majesty's troops under the command of myself, His Commander-in-Chief.
Your lordship may be assured that I shall ever be ready to obey your commands. My fellow officers are ready and willing to act in conjunction with His Majesty's troops and put themselves under your lordship's command, provided the terms and conditions of enlistment established and agreed upon be not altered. Your lordship must be informed that any alterations in the terms and conditions of the contract of enlistment will result in the dissolution of the army,
The only thing that will result in the dissolution of the army will be the insubordination of your forces. That will be all, sir. Good day.
My lord.
Loudon senses something larger is going on in America. He says in disgust, "I believe they would be looked on at home as little less than fomenters of rebellion." The French also have a new general, Louis-Joseph, the Marquis de Montcalm. He too is having problems with the forces who are supposed to be fighting with him. Though he comes personally to court his allies, to Montcalm's European eye, the Indians look like barbarians.
You would not believe it, but they carry to war, along with their tomahawk and gun, a mirror to daub their faces with various colors and arrange feathers on their heads and rings in their ears and noses.
While the Iroquois in New York maintain their neutrality, the Indians in Canada have long been allies of the French and are more than willing to go to war. But the new French general doesn't seem to appreciate his allies.
One needs the patience of an angel to get on with them. Ever since I have been here, I have had nothing but visits, harangues, and deputations of these gentlemen. The Iroquois ladies did me the honor to bring me belts of wampum, which oblige me to go to their village and sing the war song. They make war with astounding cruelty, sparing neither women nor children.
Montcalm may not like them, but he intends to use them when he goes on the offensive. Mary Jemison's journey reflects that of many captives. Abducted on the Pennsylvania frontier by the Shawnee, she is taken 70 miles to live with the Seneca.
I was so much fatigued from running, and so far benumbed by the wet and cold, that I expected I must fail and die. The fire, however, soon restored my circulation. My clothes were now torn in pieces, so that I was almost naked. They first undressed me, then they washed me clean and dressed me in complete Indian style. All the women in the town came to see me, and they immediately set up a most dismal howling, crying bitterly and wringing their hands in all the agonies of grief for a deceased relative.
Our brother, he is dead. He's gone. He will never return.
Indians take captives for many reasons. As a weapon against encroaching settlers, as ransom for guns or trade goods, but also for spiritual reasons, to replace warriors killed in battle.
Dry up your tears. His spirit has seen our distress and sent us a helper, whom with pleasure we greet. Dikawamis has come, and gladly we welcome her. In the place of our brother, she stands in our tribe.
I was made welcome amongst them as a sister. They called me Daikawamas, which means two voices falling.
While Braddock was suffering defeat and Johnson's campaign was ending in stalemate, the British achieved military victory in Nova Scotia, formerly the French colony of Acadia. They drive French forces from the region. The British governor is determined to ensure that the territory remains securely in British hands. He orders the systematic expulsion of all French-speaking settlers from the region. Acadians, who had called the land home for a century, are dispossessed of their farms and fishing boats. Whole villages are emptied, and families herded to the coast. The operation is carried out with chilling efficiency. Over the next 3 years, 10,000 of them are shipped to the British colonies. Many Acadians make their way to Louisiana, where they become known as Cajuns. But the following year, Britain meets with disaster in the West when they attempt to drive the French from Fort Niagara. The British head slowly up the Hudson River from New York. Meanwhile, Montcalm's forces travel to St. Lawrence from Montreal. The French stop the British advance at Fort Oswego. With the help of 250 Indians, the French capture the fort in just 3 days. After the battle, the Indians take the trophies of war. Plunder and captives are proof to their people that their enemies have been defeated. What the Indians consider their code of honor, Montcalm regards as savagery, breaking all the rules of European warfare. He agrees to pay ransom for the British captives and vows to restrain the Indians next time. The following year, Montcalm mounts an assault on Lake George. This time, 2,000 warriors go with him. In August 1757, 150 Indian canoes accompany an armada of French bateaux gliding down the lake. It's a formidable force. Along with the Indians are nearly 6,000 French regulars and Canadian militiamen. They are surging by land and water toward Fort William Henry, the fort William Johnson built after the Battle of Lake George. During the night of August 2nd, lookouts at the fort spot 3 large bonfires several miles up the shoreline. In the dawn light, lookouts begin to make out the oncoming armada. In the middle of the fleet, they see 30 pontoons, bateaux lashed together with planks, each carrying a heavy siege cannon or mortar. From the fort, the British realize Montcalm is setting up an encampment near the lakeshore. But they don't yet realize that an advance party, 3,000 strong, has already set up 2 more camps in the woods, close to the fort's provincial encampment and the fort itself. the British are surrounded. For the fort's commander, Lieutenant Colonel George Monroe, the situation is desperate. He writes to his superior, General Daniel Webb, imploring him to send more troops.
We know they have cannon. I make no doubt but that you'll soon send us reinforcement as soon as possible. The large French force nearby is planning to attack the fort. Without additional men from Webb, we can only hold out a few more days. This place was so suddenly surrounded. The French have not yet erected their batteries, but the Indians have been firing upon us from the woods all day.
Monroe's letter is delivered by courier to General Webb, 16 miles down the road at Fort Edward. Meanwhile, both sides gird for a classic European-style siege. Under a French red flag of truce, Montcalm's aide-de-camp, Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, approaches Fort William Henry.
Compagnie, halt!
To your commanding officer, from General Montcalm.
In accordance with European military protocol, Montcalm offers Monroe a chance to surrender before the battle begins. As leverage, he invokes the memory of the Indians' behavior at Fort Oswego.
I owe it to humanity to summon you to surrender. At present, I can restrain the natives and make them observe the terms of a capitulation, as I might not have the power to do under other circumstances. I demand a decisive answer within an hour.
Demand a decisive answer within an hour.
Still waiting for reinforcements from Webb, Monroe responds.
General Montcalm, I am especially obliged to you for the kind offers that you make me, but I cannot accept them. I am little afraid of barbarity.
Besides, I have under my orders soldiers who are determined, like myself, to die or conquer. We will fight to the last extremity.
Montcalm needs to get his cannons into firing range. He orders his troops to dig a network of trenches. 500 men work round the clock for 3 days, digging their way toward the fort. By daylight, Monroe's forces do what they can to disrupt the French efforts.
Handle cartridge! Charge, cartridge! Ram, cartridge! Prime! Advance the piece! Ready! Fire!
Monroe continues to expect news of reinforcements at any moment. The next day, General Webb finally returns the courier with his reply. Care had been taken to hide Webb's letter, but its discovery gives the French the upper hand. On the morning of August 6th, the siege opens as it had the previous 2 days, with the British bombardment directed at the French advance. But Montcalm's trenches are at last within range of the fort. This time, the French answer back with a burst of cannon and mortar rounds. From exposed positions just outside the fort walls, Indian snipers harass the British gunners. Casualties in the fort are mounting. The French artillery proves devastating. At one point, they hit the fort's flag. When a carpenter attempting to repair it is killed, the symbolism is not lost on either side. Montcalm chooses this moment to suspend the bombardment. He again sends Bougainville forward to propose the British surrender. Bougainville delivers Webb's blood-stained message found on the courier. Only then does Monroe learn that Webb thought it not prudent to send reinforcements. Instead, Webb had advised Monroe to get the best surrender terms possible.
From General Montcalm. I am sorry for you, sir. I hope General Webb's letter will persuade you to surrender the sooner.
I thank you, Captain Bougainville, for your politeness. You've been a most generous enemy. It has been my pleasure.
Advance the peace! For God's sake, fire!
According to the etiquette of siege warfare, Monroe can surrender with honor only after the fort's walls have been breached. With the walls losing timber, the fort's engineer reports to Monroe. The structure may not hold for long. More importantly, the morale of Monroe's men is shattered. Most have had little sleep for 5 days. Surrender is Monroe's only choice. Montcalm designs the terms of surrender to avoid repeating the events at Fort Oswego the year before. To prevent the Indians from taking captives, the British will be granted safe passage from the fort. Provisions and supplies will go to Canada. The British may keep their personal effects. The Indians can take what's left.
Montcalm gathered the war chiefs together. Then he told them he'd allow them none of the plunder or prisoners they expected. They listened politely, but they felt betrayed. Many had died fighting alongside their French allies, and they expected to return to their people with the honors of war. Then Montcalm further insults the Indian code of honor by sitting down to a banquet with the defeated, to which they are not invited.
Gentlemen, a toast. To our worthy opponent.
That afternoon, British officers entertained their French counterparts with an impressive spread of delicacies served with wine and beer. The Indians are quickly beginning to see a European conspiracy. At dawn on August 10th, the British regulars begin to leave, escorted by French grenadiers. Trailing the regulars is a long, disorganized line of colonial soldiers and camp followers. The Indians are not about to let what they felt they'd earned simply walk away.
The savages surrounded us, and even took my horse, which I had given to carry off the gun. The French advised giving up our effects, rather than dispute with the savages.
Hold your weapons, gentlemen. Offer no resistance. Surrender all your effects. Surrender all your effects, gentlemen. Offer no resistance.
Soldiers immediately delivered up everything to them. They took our hats and swords and began to strip us. This unexpected treatment, so contrary to the terms of the capitulation, struck so great a panic in the troops, who knew not where it would end.
But soldiers in the front are spared the worst of what comes next. New England troops at the back are set upon from every side. The killing, scalping, and looting lasts only a few minutes.
When it was over, wildly exaggerated reports of 1,500 dead fueled outrage among New England colonists. The truth is, about 75 were killed. Of the 500 taken captive, many are ransomed back within a few days. Most of the Indians go home, disgusted and empty-handed, threatening to abandon the French. What should have been a resounding victory instead leaves Canada in crisis. Because if the French can't keep their Indian allies, they can't win the war for North America.
It is now 3 years into this war, the French and Indian War. After a series of humiliating defeats to the French, the British have appointed a new commander-in-chief, Major General James Abercrombie is mobilizing the largest army ever seen in North America. Over 15,000 men and 18 massive siege cannon. More than enough to crush the French forces. His plan is to follow the highway of water north from New York City to Montreal, the heart of French Canada. Along the way, he must take the French fort Carillon, what the English call Fort Ticonderoga, that guards the crucial water passage from Lake George into Lake Champlain. On July 5th, 1758, Abercrombie's fleet set sail toward Ticonderoga. 1,000 boats cover Lake George from one side to the other. As he waits for the British to arrive, the commander of the French forces in North America, 46-year-old Louis-Joseph, the Marquis de Montcalm, knows how precarious France's position has become.
We are faced with the imminent loss of Canada. The English have 20 battalions. We have 8. Our circumstances require decisive and determined measures. It is no longer the time when a few scalps or the burning of a few houses is any advantage. Action, scrupulous and well-considered use of men and time is all that can compensate.
The Marquis knows that this upcoming battle has become part of a much bigger story. It began in North America, but by 1758, this war is a global conflict. France and Britain and their respective allies are battling in Germany over who will control Northern Europe. In West Africa, they are fighting to control the slave trade. And even in far-off India, they battle for a piece of Asia. It will become known to history as the 7 Years' War, an epic struggle to determine who will rule the greatest empire since ancient Rome. Britain's King George II, a Protestant? Or the French King Louis XV, a Catholic? In North America, the outcome of this war should have been easy to predict. The British colonists outnumbered the French by 18-1. But what Britain didn't have was the one thing it needed most: the support of the Indian nations. It was the Indians who would determine the victory in North America. And until the British figured that out, they would never be able to turn the tide. The main action of the war is unfolding in the northeast. But there is another front, an almost forgotten one, on the western frontier. That's where George Washington has been posted for 2 years. At age 25, he is commander of the Virginia Regiment, an undermanned force expected to defend the frontier from Indian raids. But his enemy is elusive. The campaign has been unsuccessful and frustrating.
I am tired of this place, the inhabitants, and the life I lead here.
So far, Washington can claim only one military engagement that wasn't a failure. A skirmish with the French that helped trigger this war. Since then, his two major battles have both ended badly. One when he surrendered to a larger French and Indian force. The other, the disastrous defeat of General Edward Braddock in 1755. Now Washington's military career is stalled, and his health precarious.
My strongest representations relative to the peace of the frontier are disregarded as idle and frivolous. My orders, dark, doubtful, and uncertain. Today approved, tomorrow condemned. I am left to proceed at hazard, accountable for the consequences, and blamed without benefit of defense.
Worst of all, he feels he and his men are treated as inferiors by the British regular army.
However, I am determined to bear up under all the embarrassments some time longer.
To plead the case for his men and himself, Washington makes a visit to the new British commander for North America, John Campbell, 4th Earl of Loudon, an aristocratic Scotsman with little patience for colonials. Washington hopes to overcome the handicap of being born an American. He believes his service on the frontier has earned him an officer's commission in the regular British Army, not merely the provincial forces. Washington writes to the general in preparation for his visit.
Although I have not the honor to be known to your lordship, yet your name was familiar to my ear on account of the important services performed to His Majesty in other parts of the world. Do not think, my lord, that I mean to flatter. My nature is honest and free from guile.
It doesn't work. Loudon keeps him waiting for several days, then finally grants him an audience. There's no record of what was said, but from all accounts, it didn't go the way Washington had hoped.
Your lordship, I trust you have had the opportunity to study my petition.
Colonel Washington, I see no reason to alter the current provisions. The regiment performs a useful function on the frontier, and I shall require it to continue in that capacity.
But, your lordship...
You shall maintain your position at Winchester.
It may be the lowest point in the young man's life.
100 men at Enid.
George Washington would never again seek a British commission.
100 men at the upper track.
Chronically ill with dysentery and worried he has tuberculosis, now Loudon's ordered him to stay on the forgotten western frontier indefinitely.
That will be all, Colonel. Thank you.
In January 1758, Washington takes sick leave from the army and returns home to run Mount Vernon, the large estate he's inherited. Unlucky in war, he's also unlucky in love. The woman he wanted, a well-known beauty named Sally Fairfax, has married one of his best friends. Meanwhile, Lord Loudon has problems of his own. Loudon needs men and money to fight the French, but the colonial assemblies are not cooperating. Massachusetts is being particularly difficult.
How can we, in good conscience, supply our men in this conflict?
The colonial legislators are asking for the same rights historically accorded to the British subjects of the king, that they give their consent to being taxed.
If his lordship, if anyone, compels us to pay a penny and we submit, then he may compel us to pay a pound. A fart for his troops, then.
But to Loudon, it's beyond comprehension that these colonials could refuse his orders. But refuse they did. Money and principles were driving a wedge between the British and the colonists. The colonists feared that this expensive war would bankrupt their governments. But more than that, they feared it would destroy their rights. The colonists were putting the Crown on notice that they would not stand to be treated as inferiors. They saw themselves as full-fledged subjects of the king, who just happened to live on the western side of the Atlantic. Just when the impasse seems unbreakable, 2 letters arrive from William Pitt, a brilliant politician who has joined the king's government as Prime Minister.
Sir, the king having judged proper that the Earl of Loudon should return to England.
The first letter fires Loudon. Even better, the second letter promises reimbursement for military expenses.
To furnish all the men so raised with arms, ammunition, and tents. Ha ha!
By simply granting the colonists most of what they want, Pitt changes the mood overnight. Unlike his predecessors, he understands that the colonists yearn to be recognized as loyal members of the British Empire. He knows that to win this war, Britain needs the full participation of these troublesome British subjects. These demanding and headstrong colonists. These Americans. Pitt's new policies make all the difference to Britain's ability to fight the war. Thousands of colonials joined General Abercrombie's army. By July 1758, when he is ready to attack Fort Ticonderoga, Abercrombie has a force of nearly 16,000 men, more than the population of Boston. This will be a fully allied effort, provincials fighting alongside British redcoats. On July 6th, General Abercrombie lands his massive army at the northern end of Lake George, just a few miles from Fort Ticonderoga.
Unfix your bayonet.
Then he halts to regroup and waits a full day. That day provides an unexpected opportunity for the Marquis de Montcalm. Outnumbered 5-1, low on supplies, he knows his fort can't withstand British cannon fire. So he takes a desperate gamble. He orders his men out of the fort and brings them nearly a mile forward toward the British. At the top of a hill, he builds a defensive wall of felled timbers. In front of the wall, Montcalm orders a barrier of sharpened treetops, an abattis. He is anxiously awaiting reinforcements, 1,000 regulars and 1,000 Indians. But they don't arrive in time. And this will be the first major action of the French and Indian War, in which no Indians will fight on the French side. Finally, on July 8th, General Abercrombie prepares to move his men forward in a frontal assault.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Abercrombie has ordered a cannon bombardment, which should make quick work of the flimsy French defenses. He doesn't know that half his giant siege guns have sunk in the lake, and the others will take too long to deploy.
To the front, march! Recover your arms! To the quick time, march!
Just after noon, the highly disciplined Redcoats march uphill toward the French entrenchment, supported by American provincials. Montcalm's improvised defense proves remarkably effective. The British are slowed to a crawl. The men were cut down like grass, wrote a Massachusetts private.
The ground was strewed with the dead and dying. A man could not stand erect without being hit, for the balls came by the handful. And I could hear the men screaming and see them dying all around me.
The attacks carry on all day. The carnage continues for nearly 8 hours. The formidable Scottish Highlanders are the only British forces to get near the French wall, but even they can't prevail. Before it's over, the British and provincials will lose nearly 2,000 dead or wounded. Montcalm's casualties are only 380. Once again, the British discover that overwhelming numbers alone are not enough to produce a victory.
Quel beau jour pour la France. Without Indians and almost without Canadian or colony troops, I have beaten an army of 25,000. This glorious day does infinite honor to the valor of our battalions. Ah, what soldiers are ours. I have never seen the like.
Montcalm's far smaller force has driven the huge British army into a headlong retreat. After the battle, French soldiers find the shoes of British soldiers stuck in the mud. The Redcoats were running so fast, they didn't even stop to retrieve them. But Montcalm's stunning victory is shallow. Without more men and supplies from France, he can't pursue the British. The Marquis sends urgent pleas for help, but he hears little in response. The defeat at Ticonderoga shatters Britain's hopes for a quick victory, along with General Abercrombie's reputation. In the wake of the disaster,
a brash suggestion comes from an unlikely quarter, an American-born colonel named John Bradstreet. Bradstreet suggests a bold strike at the heart of the French-Canadian colony. Soon after the defeat at Ticonderoga, he takes a small army from Lake George to the eastern end of Lake Ontario, 250 miles through Iroquois lands. Bradstreet's soldiers are almost exclusively colonials from New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Rhode Island. This is their chance to show what the Americans can do for the British cause. Their goal is the French fort Frontenac at the headwaters of the St. Lawrence River. Bradstreet orders an immediate bombardment, leaving the French no opportunity to prepare their defenses. Fort Frontenac surrenders within hours. Inside the fort are cannon, muskets, and food meant to supply Canada's western outposts. It's a blow from which the French Empire in North America will never recover.
For Frontenac has fallen. That was merely our principal supply base for the whole of the upper country. How could this happen? Now, how shall we hold the West?
The news from Fort Frontenac is bad enough, but even worse reports come from the East Coast. Canada's critical port on the Atlantic, Louisbourg, is falling to the British. Under heavy fire, Brigadier General James Wolfe leads his troops ashore. For 6 weeks, British and American forces lay siege to the heavily fortified city. The death knell comes when British sailors sneak into the harbor and destroy the last French battleships in Canada. The French have no choice but to surrender. The fall of Louisbourg is a turning point in the French and Indian War. If France can't halt the British advances, the loss of Canada may indeed be imminent. But there is still one place where the British have made no progress at all. The western frontier, where this war began 3 years earlier. What's at stake here is the Ohio country, 200,000 square miles, an area as large as France. To control the Ohio country means dominating one spot in particular, a strategic river junction in Pennsylvania called the Forks of the Ohio River, the place where Pittsburgh stands today. In 1758, the Forks are firmly in French hands. They have built Fort Duquesne, which commands all river traffic in the region. But the French have another potent weapon, their long alliance with the native peoples. Dozens of Indian nations coexist in eastern North America. For a century and a half, the French have traded with and fought beside many of them. Now, in this war against the English to determine who will control North America, maintaining the loyalty of those Indian allies is the only hope for France. It's a reality that the French commander has a hard time accepting. Montcalm is an old-school general who wants to fight the European way, not la guerre sauvage, as he calls the Indian style of warfare. It puts him directly at odds with French Canada's civilian governor, the Marquis de Vaudreuil, who believes in using native allies to terrorize the enemy. For the Indians, forming an alliance with the French is a survival strategy. They're not fighting on behalf of France. They're fighting to maintain control over the land they see as their birthright. And the French seem less likely than the English to try to take it from them. In the eyes of most British settlers and soldiers, the native people of North America are exotic and savage, ready to scalp, murder, or take whites captive at every opportunity. The truth is, Indians do take white settlers captive on the frontier. But the victims often have less to fear than they think. One of them, Susanna Johnson, left an account of her life as a prisoner of the Abenaki.
We were in the power of unmerciful savages, without provision and almost without clothes, when I was taken with the pangs of childbirth.
You're doing well, Susanna, I promise.
Susanna gives birth during the forced march north.
None but a mother can understand my unhappy fortune.
She names her baby Captive and wonders if either of them will survive.
Whenever the warriors return from an excursion against the enemy, the captives must be conducted in a triumphant form and decorated to every possible advantage.
At their village, the Abenaki prepare for the ritual that greets all new captives.
Each Indian took his prisoner by the hand and began to march through the gauntlet. We expected a severe beating, but they just gave us a tap on the shoulder. I was then introduced to my new family and was told to call them brothers and sisters.
Susanna's eventual fate reveals one of the many strange twists this war would bring to North America. After months with her adoptive Abenaki family, she is redeemed, bought by the French, and taken to live as a prisoner of the Canadians in Montreal. Susanna's story is not unusual. The French spend considerable sums to ransom captives from the native peoples. In French Canada, the war has created a severe labor shortage. Captives help fill the gap. While for the Indians, captive taking becomes a desperately needed source of income.
Voici 3 lettres de Monsieur de Vaudreuil. The fortress at Louisbourg has fallen. The way to Quebec is now wide open. The English will surely pay us a visit next year.
British victories along the St. Lawrence River have made Canada vulnerable. Montcalm knows the noose is tightening.
We still have Niagara, which is heavily fortified.
True. But how shall it be supplied? Monsieur Bradstreet has kindly destroyed our fleet at Frontenac. We must build more ships, or we shall lose control of Lake Ontario.
To make matters worse, corrupt officials are sapping the French-Canadian supply system, bleeding the war effort dry. At the center is Francois Bigot, an affable man with a notorious gambling habit. He's in charge of equipping the army, but he sells the war supplies and keeps the profits for himself and his cronies. The losers are, of course, the French soldiers. General Montcalm is furious at the greed that cripples his ability to fight the English.
The official corruption no longer knows any limits. It devours all the substance of the country. It plays with men's lives.
And Montcalm's pleas for help are met with only a token response.
The minister has this to say. I have received your letter of 6th April, etc., etc. The king has seen fit to send you 800 recruits. A handful of recruits. I ask for regiments, they send recruits.
2,000 miles away in the Palace of Versailles, it seems that Louis XV and Madame Pompadour, the power behind the throne, are far more invested in their European campaigns than in Canada. The fact is, France had become bogged down in a costly war in Europe that should have been an easy win. But it didn't work out that way. By 1758, the French treasury was drained, and Louis XV was desperate for a European victory. Montcalm and North America would have to wait. In reply to Montcalm's repeated requests, one of the king's ministers makes the message clear.
When the house is on fire, one cannot occupy oneself with the stable, monsieur.
I do not know how long this can continue. There is not a man in our army who does not feel the pangs of hunger. It is much to ask of men to be brave when they are weak for want of bread.
It's not just the French soldiers who feel the effects of Montcalm's supply problems. Without gifts of muskets and powder, the French will lose the loyalty of their longtime Indian allies. 3 years of war are already taking a terrible toll on Indian villages. Smallpox decimates whole settlements. Hunger has become a way of life. Making peace with the English may be a matter of survival. But until the British can take Fort Duquesne at the forks of the Ohio, they'll never win the West. General Edward Braddock's devastating failure to take the forks in 1755 has left the British High Command wary. No one wants to repeat Braddock's errors. So in 1758, when the British turn their attention back to Fort Duquesne, they send a general who has no illusions about what he's up against.
This country is an immense, uninhabited wilderness, overgrown everywhere so that one cannot see 20 yards.
General John Forbes, a determined Scotsman, will carve a road through the wilderness in a methodical way. He will build a fort or staging post every 50 miles from Philadelphia to the forks of the Ohio, a strategy designed to avoid the fate that befell Braddock's army. But Forbes realizes that to conquer Fort Duquesne, he will need to do more than just march his army through the forest. He tries something no British general has done before. He makes diplomatic overtures to the Ohio Country Indians.
I desire to set a treaty on foot between the Shawnee, the Delaware, and the people of Pennsylvania to deprive the French of their friendship.
He will have to reverse decades of native bitterness over English duplicity. And he is seriously ill. General Forbes is determined to see Fort Duquesne fall before he dies. For help, Forbes turns to an unlikely ally, an eastern Delaware chief named Tediuscung. More than 50 years old, Tediuscung has a long and tangled history with both the British and the French. He had once embraced Christianity. Baptized, he took the name Gideon and hoped this new faith would help him find a secure homeland for his people and himself.
I sit as a bird upon a bough. I look about and do not know where to go. Let me therefore come down upon the ground and make that my own, and I shall have a home forever.
But a year into the French and Indian War, Tediuscung left Christianity behind and turned to war instead, attacking British settlers moving onto land that had been stolen through fraudulent treaties. Waging war seemed the best way to send a message that he and his people are a power to be reckoned with.
This very ground that is under me was our land and inheritance. And was taken from us by fraud. And the Indians have suffered for it. We are not such fools. The Indians could make peace, and the Indians could break peace when it is made.
As much as Tediuscung wanted to call the shots, the reality of war made that difficult. His followers were starving, and he realized that coming to terms with the British would be the only way to achieve security and land for his people. Encouraged by Pennsylvania's pacifist Quakers, Tediuscung started a peace process in the Ohio country just in time to help General Forbes. 4 years earlier, it had been an Indian leader, the Half-King, who triggered the war in the Ohio country. Now, a different native leader would be the key to ending it. Tediuscung finds two men to carry the message of peace west, a Delaware chief named Piscatoman and a Delaware-speaking missionary, Christian Frederick Post.
The great king of England does not incline to have war with the Indians, but wants to live in peace and love with them. If they lay down the hatchet and leave off war against them. They said to me, "Why do you come to fight in our land?" This makes everybody believe you want to take the land from us. I said I did not intend to take the land from them, but only to drive the French away.
The Indians listen, but are skeptical. The English reputation for land swindles is hard to overcome. Forbes' emissaries assure the Indian leaders that this time it will be different. Even as the diplomats do their work, General Forbes continues to cut his road through the woods toward Fort Duquesne. The dense forest isn't his only impediment. The young Virginia Colonel, George Washington, has rejoined the Army for the final push to conquer the forks of the Ohio. And Washington had his own ideas about the best route the British Army should take. Forbes plans to build his road west from Philadelphia, the shortest possible path. Whichever route it follows, Forbes's road will pave the way for a rush of traders and settlers to the Ohio country. Washington lobbies hard to get Forbes to change his plans and instead follow General Braddock's southern route, which would favor Virginia. He doesn't hold back on his opinion of Forbes.
The conduct of our leaders is tempered with something I don't care to put a name to.
Forbes gets hold of a letter Washington wrote.
Could not discover the bottom from whence this sprang, until Colonel Washington in a letter thoroughly shows himself the leader of their foolish suggestions. Indeed, I will go further and say they are dupes, or worse, to Pennsylvanian artifice, to whose selfish views I attribute this miscarriage. The Virginians came such a length as to be most singularly impertinent. It has long been the luckless fate of poor Virginia to fall victim to her crafty neighbors. We can now only bewail that blindness and wish for happier times.
In the end, Washington doesn't get his way. Forbes Road carves the path that will eventually become the Pennsylvania Turnpike. In the autumn of 1758, Forbes reaps the rewards of his diplomatic efforts. The colonists sign a historic treaty with several Indian nations. The Pennsylvanians pledge no new settlements west of the Allegheny Mountains. The Indians promise peace. Titiuscung is instrumental in bringing the sides together. In return, he is guaranteed thousands of acres for his people to build a farming community. Finally, peaceful coexistence with the white man seems within reach. By November, Forbes's army is within 50 miles of the forks of the Ohio. They're at Ligonier, the jumping-off point for the final assault on Fort Duquesne. For the first time in 3 years, British scouts can now see the fort and try to gauge the enemy's strength. In preparation for the assault, Forbes orders 2 parties of soldiers to chase down raiders who stubbornly continue to harass the British. George Washington leads one of the squads. The other is commanded by his close friend, Colonel George Mercer. The 2 groups come across each other in heavy fog.
target and keep firing! It's Mercer! Hold your fire! Hold your fire, men! It's Mercer!
When the fog clears for a moment, Washington realizes the terrible mistake.
Hold your fire!
He throws himself between the two lines, indifferent to the musket balls flying past his head. When the friendly fire skirmish was over, 2 officers and 38 men were dead or wounded. Incredibly, George Washington was unhurt. This was only his 4th major military action and not one he could take any pride in. But no one could question his remarkable bravery or his luck. Years later, he recalled that this was the most dangerous moment of his life and speculated that perhaps Providence might have spared him for some other purpose. Just 2 weeks later, on November 23rd, 1758, Forbes' army is finally ready to make its assault on Fort Duquesne. But rather than fight a battle they know they will lose, the outnumbered French destroy the fort and withdraw to Canada. Without firing a shot, General Forbes has won the prize. He renames the spot Pittsburgh for the Prime Minister who made victory possible. A few months later, he is dead. For 5 years, George Washington has been working toward this goal, wresting the forks of the Ohio away from the French. He stays only long enough to perform one sad duty. Returning to the battlefield where General Braddock and hundreds of troops were killed 3 years earlier, Washington's men bury the remains with overdue military honors. Since this war began, Washington has suffered painful illness and survived several brushes with death. He has made some serious blunders and been part of Britain's worst defeat in North America. But he is coming away with valuable experience forged in the fire of battle, and the lessons he's learned will not be forgotten. At age 27, he decides it's time to let others finish the war. He returns to Mount Vernon. There he will embark on 2 new chapters in his life. One is political. He has recently won a seat in the Virginia House of Burgesses. The other, personal. He's going home to marry Martha Custis, the wealthiest widow in Virginia. War seldom brings happy endings. But for George Washington, this one came close. On his retirement from the army, he had won the respect of the men who had served under him. Perhaps more important, he had accomplished what he had set out to do. For the British, 1758 was the year that turned the tide. Finally, the empire they wanted so badly was within reach. But to grasp it would prove more painful than anyone could imagine.
Have you found an opening yet? You're an imbecile.
Major General James Wolfe, a sickly but highly ambitious officer, is determined to prove himself on the battlefield. For 2 months, he has played a waiting game. His army is camped on the opposite shore, ready to take the city of Quebec. If only he can draw the Marquis de Montcalm into battle. But the Marquis does not want to engage the British.
Alors, let Wolfe amuse himself where he is. If we drive him off, he may go someplace where he can really do us harm.
After 3 months of trying, Wolfe still has not managed to capture the city. If he doesn't attack Quebec before winter sets in, he'll be forced to give up the siege and the chance for a crucial victory in the French and Indian War. The British are poised to expel the French army from Canada. They now control the St. Lawrence River, cutting off France from North America's interior. They could soon control the continent. But first, they must take the enemy stronghold at Quebec. But Quebec is proving impenetrable, perched on a triangle of land atop steep cliffs, where water surrounds the city on 2 sides. Wolfe first attacks from the east, only to see nearly 500 of his men killed or wounded at the Battle of Montmorency. Many excellent officers hurt in this foolish business, he writes. Frustrated, Wolfe lashes out.
I have changed my measures and laid waste to the country. Partly to engage the Marquis de Montcalm, and partly in return for many insults offered to our own people upon our own frontiers.
Wolfe orders his redcoats to burn the settlements beyond Quebec. 1,400 houses are torched. But the capital of New France is far from giving up. British forces try to bombard Quebec into submission. The fires that engulf the city produce some of the most horrifying moments of the entire war. But in France, Louis XV considers the struggle for North America just one part of a global war with Britain. Instead of reinforcements, he sends Montcalm encouragement, saying, "His Majesty relies completely on your zeal and your knowledge of what can best be done to save Canada." Wolfe grows desperate. He has fallen victim to fever, and so have his soldiers. By summer's end, a third of his army is unfit to serve. The British have been shelling the city for 6 weeks. And still, Montcalm will not come out to fight.
My antagonist has wisely set himself up in inaccessible entrenchments, so I can't get at him without spilling a torrent of blood, and that perhaps to little purpose.
Wolfe believes he may soon die, and fears his failure to act will bring him disgrace. Finally, in September, his attention is drawn to a path leading up steep cliffs to the plains just west of Quebec. In an audacious nighttime maneuver, he orders 4,500 men to scale the steep cliffs. It takes them less than 5 hours. The element of surprise works. By dawn, the British assemble on the Plains of Abraham just outside the city walls. Wolfe employs a novel formation, spreading his men out in 2 ranks instead of the traditional 3 to cover the half-mile width of the plains. Montcalm knows that the British are the more disciplined soldiers. But the British line seems especially thin. He believes that a column of troops can smash it. It's a classic European battle that will depend on the skill and precision of each side's infantry. But as the French advance, order breaks down. Their line becomes ragged.
We had not gone 200 paces before the left was too far in the rear and the center too far in front.
The French begin to fire before they're within range. The British do not flinch. Wolfe waits to the last for maximum effect. The British attack is overwhelming. A British sailor would later note, the entire battle lasts no more than 10 minutes. Decimated, the French flee back to the city. 4 days later, they surrender. During the battle, Wolfe is wounded in the wrist and the chest. When asked if he needs a surgeon, he replies, "It is needless. It is all over with me." Wolfe becomes a hero throughout the British Empire, and his death glorified in a succession of idealized paintings. Across the battlefield, Montcalm is shot in the abdomen. The depiction of his death is even more fanciful. In fact, he died not on the battlefield, but in a doctor's house back in town. The paintings have also left the lasting impression that this was the climactic and decisive end of the war.
In truth, it was anything but. The French and Indian War would drag on for another year. The real turning point came when the Indians tipped the balance of power. In 1759, the Iroquois made a momentous decision to abandon 50 years of neutrality and ally themselves with the British. In the summer of 1760, Britain prepares to take the last French holdout at Montreal. To do so, they must navigate the whitewater rapids of the St. Lawrence River. The trip is made all the more dangerous by passing through territory controlled by Canadian Mohawk, allied with the French. The Indians of North America are diverse nations with complicated, often conflicting interests. Mohawk in Canada have different allegiances than Mohawk in New York, who are part of a larger confederacy, the Iroquois Six Nations. It's these Indians that side with the British. As the British head down the St. Lawrence River,
Iroquois diplomats go from village to village, convincing the Canadian Mohawk to stay neutral. The expedition owes its success to their efforts. But the Iroquois, the most valuable men on the expedition, were despised and distrusted by the Army's commander, General Jeffrey Amherst. Amherst orchestrates an impressive campaign. 3 British armies converge on Montreal at the same time. The British arrive with crushing force. The result is a bloodless surrender. On September 8, 1760, the French and Indian War comes to an end. The Chevalier de Bougainville is sent to meet General Amherst.
General, I have come from Governor General Vaudreuil with the instructions to propose an armistice until it might be ascertained whether a peace has been concluded in Europe.
Tell the Governor General I have come to take Canada, and I do not intend to take anything less.
When the French learn that Amherst intends to deny them even the honor of keeping their regimental flags, officers prefer to burn their colors rather than hand them over to the British as trophies. After a century of trade and alliance with the Indians, French influence in North America is at an end. The French and Indian War is finally over. Voltaire would later quip that in surrendering Canada, France had lost only a few acres of snow. It is, of course, much more. Britain's holdings are suddenly transformed into a continental empire of nearly 500 million acres. The territory holds vast potential. But as the British will discover, the fruits of imperial victory can also carry the seeds of an empire's disintegration. To the young man who'd been at the center of the war, the news from Canada should have been more exciting. But George Washington is a civilian again. Each morning, Washington rides out to oversee activity on his estate, made larger through his marriage to the wealthy widow Martha Custis.
I am now, I believe, fixed at this seat with an agreeable consort for life, and hope to find more happiness in retirement than I ever experienced amidst a wide and bustling world.
Washington has also been elected to Virginia's Assembly, the House of Burgesses. He sits on the Committee of Propositions and Grievances. It's an exciting time to enter politics in America. The reason it's exciting is the King's Prime Minister, William Pitt. He had encouraged the colonists to think of themselves as active partners with the Crown in a great imperial enterprise.
We asked that you consider that next year...
Colonists willingly put up money and manpower for the war. In return, they assumed Parliament recognized it was their right to levy taxes through their elected representatives. It's a misunderstanding that would eventually lead to revolution. After his victory at Montreal, the job of keeping order in the colonies is given to General Amherst, along with a knighthood. But Britain has not given Sir Geoffrey what he needs to do the job, leaving him to struggle with tight budgets and dwindling manpower. Britain has shifted its manpower away from America. It is now fighting for control of French islands in the West Indies, part of the global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. Britain succeeds in taking French territory in Africa and French trading posts in India. When Spain sides with France, the war spreads to Spanish possessions in the Philippines and elsewhere. Amherst's job isn't made any easier by his view of the Indians. Though Indians were crucial to him in delivering the French surrender, Amherst has little regard for what he calls the savage enemy. Amherst orders a series of reforms. He restricts Indian access to ammunition, and to save the empire money, he curtails gift-giving, a time-honored custom. His aim is to transform the Crown's relationship with Indians from that of powerful allies into master and subjects. But the Indians do not see themselves as subjects, and they are wary of further encroachments on their land. They see the British building a tremendous stronghold called Fort Pitt on the forks of the Ohio, despite the Treaty of Easton, which promised no British settlement west of the Allegheny Mountains. There's growing talk of war. William Johnson, the Crown's Superintendent of Indian Affairs, is one man who appreciates that a war with Indians is something Britain can ill afford.
Your Excellency, I am pretty well informed by other hands that the Six Nations, Shawnees, and Delaware's Indians are ill-disposed.
Mere bugbears. I am persuaded this alarm will end in nothing more than a rash attempt of what they've been threatening for some time.
They say we mean to make slaves of them by taking so many posts in the country.
I am fully convinced that the only true method of treating those savages is to keep them in proper subjection and punish, without exception, the transgressors. Good day, sir.
Your Lordship.
Bonjour, Luigi Nishna, Paddock. Brethren, the English have treated us with much disrespect.
In 1763, an Ottawa war chief named Pontiac uses powerful religious ideas to stir his fellow Indians to action.
The Master of Life took Nowland by the hand and gave him a fancy hat.
Pontiac tells them of the visions of a Delaware Indian prophet named Nowland and his encounter with their creator, the Master of Life.
The Master of Life spoke to him. This land that I created was for you and no one else. As for those who came to trouble your lands, Nowland said, drive them out. Make war upon them.
War belts spread Pontiac's message. Indians who once played the two European empires against each other now band together against the British. This would be a new war. On the morning of June 2nd, 1763, warriors from the Ojibwe and Sauk nations are engaged in a heated game of bagataway, or as the French call it, lacrosse. The game is entering its third day outside Fort Michilimackinac on the northernmost reaches of modern-day Michigan. We know of the game that day from the writings of one of the first English traders to venture into the territories, Alexander Henry.
I did not go to see the match, which was to be played outside the fort, but rather employed myself in writing letters.
The British had no idea why this game of lacrosse was really being played here. They didn't realize that Amherst's reforms had insulted and enraged the native people. And they had not yet heard a very important piece of news. Only the Indians knew that a month earlier, Pontiac had inspired an Indian attack on Fort Detroit.
Make war upon them.
It was a sign of things to come. And now it comes to Michilimackinac.
Going instantly to my window, I saw a group of Indians within the fort. They were furiously cutting down and scalping every Englishman they found. The dying were writhing and shrieking under the knife and tomahawk. I was shaken, not only with horror but with fear. I found many of the French-Canadian inhabitants calmly looking on.
The attack at Michilimackinac would be repeated as one British outpost after another falls to the Indians, and this new war spreads across the land. Under Amherst's command, the British managed to lose all but 3 of their major forts in the backcountry to Indians inspired by Pontiac. Hundreds of soldiers and thousands of civilians are killed or taken captive.
Today is an historic event. Gentlemen, a toast.
Cheers. Coincidentally, on that same day in 1763, George Washington joins a group of Virginians in a land venture to colonize the Ohio country. They seek a land grant of nearly 4,000 square miles. Washington and his partners hope it will bring them wealth and the status they crave as English gentlemen. But there's a problem. 5 years earlier, in the Treaty of Easton, Britain promised the Indians that whites would not settle west of the Allegheny Mountains. But this claim lies hundreds of miles beyond the Alleghenies, in what is today Indiana.
Cheers. To men like Washington, though, the Treaty of Easton was just a local agreement that didn't affect their land claim. Washington was looking to the future, to the day when the British would establish new colonies in the heart of the continent. And he wasn't adverse to being in on the ground floor.
Pontiac's war rages on, and Britain loses control of the frontier. As with Mary Jemison's family in the French and Indian War, Indians are again taking settlers captive. After Mary was taken in Pennsylvania, her family was killed.
I can remember my mother's words.
My dear little Mary, your life, my child, I think will be spared, but we shall be tomahawked in this lonesome place. Be careful, and do not forget your English tongue.
Mary was taken to a Seneca village and adopted into the tribe. With the frontier in turmoil again, producing more stories like Mary's, pressure mounts on Geoffrey Amherst to do something. Amherst is short of money, he's short of men, and he's not getting much help from the colonial legislatures. Now Sir Geoffrey raises the possibility of a weapon he would never consider using against a European foe.
Could it not be contrived to send the smallpox among those disaffected tribes of Indians? We must on this occasion use every stratagem in our power to reduce them. We would do well to try to infect the Indians by means of blankets, as well as to try every other method that can serve to extirpate this execrable race.
In fact, smallpox has already ravaged the Indians. Amherst's orders make little difference. Sir Geoffrey is unable to keep order. He is relieved of his command. On November 17th, 1763, Amherst heads home to England aboard a ship named the Weasel. Although Indian raids have subsided, the Pennsylvania frontier remains tense. In early December, Matthew Smith and friends from Paxton, Pennsylvania, report an exaggerated rumor of hostile Indians nearby. In fact, the Indians of Conestoga are peaceful farmers.
We cautiously crawled to get a view. I saw Indians armed. They were strangers. They outnumbered us by dozens.
On December 14th, 50 armed vigilantes descend on Conestoga. Instead of dozens, only 6 Indians were in the camp. They track down 14 more who have escaped and slaughtered them too, scalping the children for effect. The Paxton boys spread the word that they intend to kill every Indian in Pennsylvania. In an effort to end the bloodshed, the British and the Ohio Indians establish a truce. A treaty is signed and hundreds of captives taken by Indians are returned, some against their will. Many, like Mary Jemison, have adopted an Indian way of life.
I had been with the Indians 4 summers and 4 winters. Shaninji and I were married according to Indian custom. My anxiety to be set at liberty had almost subsided.
To encourage the return of captives, the King of England offers a bounty. In Mary, a neighboring Dutchman sees a chance to make some money.
I ran from him with all the speed I was mistress of and got home. The chiefs gave orders that I should not be taken without my consent, and that as it was my choice to stay, I should live amongst them, quietly and undisturbed.
Mary Jemison lived as a Seneca for the rest of her life. In February 1763, Britain and France signed the Treaty of Paris, ending at last the 7 Years' War. King George III now rules more territory across the globe than was ever held by the Roman Empire. But the territory in North America is now so vast, the British must find a new way to manage it. The king issues the Royal Proclamation of 1763. Among its provisions is a new boundary. The proclamation goes even further than the Treaty of Easton, asserting that all lands west of the Appalachians, the heart of the continent, are reserved for the Indians. And yet, more immigrants than ever are settling in the backcountry. In the 1760s, the Ohio country plays host to a new migration from Britain and other parts of Europe. Newcomers cut their way into North America's interior, often marking the corners of their land claims with their initials. The migration was fueled by letters from friends and relatives who had served with British forces during the French and Indian War. Colonials had been fighting for access to the continent's vast interior. After all, that's what they thought the war was all about. And now the king has declared the very land they are settling is off limits, reserved for Indians. And there was another source of tension: money. The war had doubled Britain's national debt. British taxpayers had long shouldered the burden. Now, Parliament expected American colonists to pay their share. A small tax on paper, the Stamp Act, causes an unexpectedly violent reaction in the colonies. Riots break out. Tax officials are burned in effigy and forced from their jobs. The tax is widely ignored. Why is the reaction so incendiary? The root of colonial frustrations can be traced to the French and Indian War. As far back as 1755, General Braddock had met resistance when he demanded the colonists pay toward the cost of the war.
You cannot tell me you have not the power to make these little assemblies do the king's will.
The relationship changed when William Pitt became the king's prime minister and treated the colonists with respect.
Letters, gentlemen, from London.
They had been happy to contribute to the war effort as long as they were considered full partners in the empire with the same rights as people in Britain. But now, Parliament imposes this new tax without their consent. The colonists feel betrayed. British policy increasingly frustrates George Washington. It is an obstacle on his path towards prosperity as a planter and land speculator. In the fall of 1770, Washington visits his land surveyor, who has lined up some choice parcels in the Ohio country. His journey takes him back to the places where he had once fought for the British Empire. Near the forks of the Ohio, where he had barely survived the first real battle of the war at Fort Necessity. As a reward for their service in the French and Indian War, colonial soldiers were promised land. Washington is here today to reap his reward. But because the Royal Proclamation of 1763 preserves the West for the Indians, he knows he can't take possession. Yet. Like many people, he believes it won't be long before he can. On his trip, Washington dines at Fort Pitt.
I saw some exceeding fine land. There is an opening prospect in the backcountry for adventurers, where an enterprising man with very little money may lay the foundation of a noble estate in new settlements for himself and posterity.
And what of the proclamation line? Are we not to protect the Indian lands? Surely we must give the Indians something if we are to keep the peace.
I can never look upon that proclamation in any other light but as a temporary expedient to quiet the minds of the Indians. It must fall, surely, in a few years.
The Crown itself has not yet consented.
Consent or no, they're settling it as fast as a wildfire. Last year, I'm sure there were between 4,000 and 5,000. And all this spring and summer, the roads are lined with wagons, all moving to the Ohio.
Any person who neglects the opportunity of hunting out good lands and, in some measure, marking and distinguishing them as their own will never regain the opportunity.
It was 20 years before that Washington had first been dispatched to secure this territory for the British Empire. His guide on that journey was the Seneca chief Gayasuta. It's ironic that they would meet again now as Washington seeks to acquire the land for himself. Like so many Indians, Gayasuta was used to a world where two empires could be played off each other. Nevertheless, the Seneca chief seems pleased to see Washington again.
In the person of Gayasuta, I found an old acquaintance, he being one of the Indians that went with me to the French in 1753. He expressed satisfaction in seeing me and greeted us with great kindness. He thanked me for saying that peace and friendship was the wish of my people, and again expressed his people's desire and their friendly disposition to the white people.
Despite their friendliness, Gayasuta knows that Washington is not here merely to pay a social call, but to acquire land. It is only British policy that's holding Washington back, just as British policies are angering colonists elsewhere. In New England, a clash of expectations leads to mounting tension. British rule is seen as heavy-handed, a riot ends when redcoats kill 5 in what colonists call the Boston Massacre. They see Britain as riding roughshod over the rights of colonial assemblies. Radicals increasingly assert the right of self-rule. In December 1773, things come to a head over yet another tax, this time on tea. Britain's reaction to the Boston Tea Party is severe. The Crown floods Boston with troops and rewrites the colony's charter. Even moderates like Washington find these developments disturbing. When he and his colleagues express solidarity with Boston, the royal governor dissolves Virginia's legislature. They reconvene at the nearby Raleigh Tavern.
For my part, I shall not undertake to say where the line between Great Britain and the colonies should be drawn, but I am clearly of the opinion that one ought to be drawn, and our rights clearly ascertained. I could wish, I own, that this dispute had been left to posterity to determine, but the crisis is upon us, and our rights must be asserted.
And yet, even at this moment of crisis, colonists like Washington have no interest in breaking away from the empire. Their concerns amount to a family argument, not a call to revolution. This portrait shows Washington wearing a gorget, the mark of a British officer. It affirms his allegiance to the crown. In September 1774, at the First Continental Congress, Washington and other colonial representatives call for a coordinated effort to resist British actions. Relations with Britain continue to deteriorate. And Washington is drawn further into the fray. A stream of admirers come to Mount Vernon to seek his political and military counsel. Americans prepare to defend what they see as their rights, by force of arms if necessary. In April 1775, fighting erupts in Massachusetts between colonial and British forces. This is no longer a family feud, a dispute between loyal members of the empire. Once blood has been shed, there's no going back. With Boston under siege, a second Continental Congress is convened. Washington no longer aspires to be a British gentleman. He used to order his suits cut to the latest styles in London. To this Congress, he wears the uniform he designed for Virginia's new militia. It has been 20 years since the young, naive colonel set off into the backcountry to join a battle sparking an epic struggle. Now he anticipates a new battle. The Second Continental Congress must organize a war and decide who will lead it.
Washington! Welcome!
Some take Washington's uniform as a statement that he is prepared to lead the colonial forces. John Adams notes, his great experience and abilities in military matters is of much service to us. Then Adams nominates him to be commander of the Continental Forces.
Resolved that a general be appointed. George Washington, Esquire, is unanimously elected, and that he will command...
It was utterly out of my power to refuse this appointment without exposing my character to such censure as would have reflected dishonor upon myself. I shall rely, therefore, confidently upon that providence which heretofore has preserved and been bountiful to me.
A year later, Washington is preparing ragtag Continental troops for battle. It is 21 years to the day since Washington witnessed General Braddock's stunning defeat in the first major battle of the French and Indian War.
I did not let the anniversary of the 9th of this month pass without a grateful remembrance of the escape we had on the banks of the Monongahela.
It is the same Providence that spared him that horrendous day, Washington hopes, which will see them through the battle to come. Like Washington, many of these soldiers are veterans of another war, a war fought fervently on behalf of their empire, not against it. How unexpected, how ironic. Britain won the war for America, but in doing so, it unleashed passions that will lead it to lose America.
Gentlemen, a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands.
The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction.
And that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved.
Hip, hip! Huzzah! Hip, hip! Huzzah! Hip, hip! Huzzah!
Anna, Otene, Gandan.
That same month, at the forks of the Ohio, the heart of events for the past 23 years, colonial representatives meet with Gayasuta.
You have not told us
He tries to assert Indian dominion over the land.
we will not suffer, either the English or Americans, to march an army through our country. I am appointed by the Six Nations to take care of this country. And I will.
And he tries. To maintain the independence of his people, Gayasuta needs a powerful ally. But the French are gone forever, and the British would abandon the Indians to their fate. Under President Washington, Americans forced the Indians off the lands that Gayasuta vowed to defend. In 1754, no one in America imagined that a backwoods territorial dispute would end up transforming the world. But the French and Indian War did just that. By eliminating France's empire in North America, by allowing British leaders to believe they could exercise power without restraint, by convincing colonists they had no choice but to resist that power, even to the point of revolution, and by depriving Indian people of the allies needed to help protect their land and their autonomy. No one expected any of this to happen, but by changing the face of the continent, the French and Indian War became the war that made America.